What's going on, guys? Welcome to episode 2 of How to Throw Discus. In today's video, I'm going to be explaining the standing throw for discus and everything that you need to know about it. To start things off today, I want to say that if you haven't seen episode 1, I definitely recommend going back and checking that out. I'll put a link to it in the description below. And in that video, I cover a lot of important things about the discus throw, like how to release it out of your hand to get a smooth flight, and some of the basic physics of the discus throw. And in today's episode, I want to expand on some of those concepts, so it'll be really helpful if you guys understand that from the beginning. Anyway, let's get into things. The standing throw is a fundamental part of your discus technique, and it's an exercise that's designed for you to work on the finishing part of your full throw. And here's what my coach had to say about stand throws.
It's a drill, it's not a stand throw from distance, right?
Yeah.
It's a drill that you want to get fixed. Yeah.
So keeping in mind that it's a drill and you're not trying to throw for distance, it's important to make sure that you're getting proper positions so that eventually you'll be using it to improve your full throw. To help you find some of these positions, I want to first break down some of the physics of what's going on in a standing throw so that you understand what you're trying to achieve with each body part. So the first concept I want you to understand is that you're trying to accelerate the disc around you on a rotational path, and when you let go of it, the discus will rotate off of your index finger, continuing with its forward momentum straight down the sector. And when you're doing a full throw, you're trying to work on the exact same thing. The discus is accelerating around you rotationally. So a good way to visualize yourself as a discus thrower is by taking a look at this clay pigeon thrower, and you're trying to achieve the same mechanics as this by having the implement rotate around you on a nice smooth rotational path so that on release the disc continues to fly nice and straight. The first body part that I want to talk about is your block leg. This is the leg that's closest to the front of the ring, and it's responsible for stopping the rotational momentum of that side, allowing you to continue the rotational momentum with only your throwing side, so that you can direct all of the energy into the implement on the finish. And that brings me into the second body part that I want to talk about, which is your foot in the middle of the circle. The job of this foot is to rotate, creating a stretch through your core that then assists you in snapping the discus out on the finish. So as the foot turns, it's stretching the muscles in your core like a rubber band, and as you finish the throw, you use that potential energy to snap the discus out with a little bit more speed. So if we take a look at this example, I tried to demonstrate the potential energy using this arrow, and you can see that it builds and gets stronger as the foot rotates, and as the discus comes around on the finish, it's contracting again, and you're trying to use that energy to add a little bit of extra power into the implement. The final body part that I want to talk about for this portion of the video is your off arm. This plays a similar role as your foot in the middle, in that it's trying to create a stretch reflex through your muscles. But instead of creating a stretch reflex through your core, you're pulling your off arm open to create a stretch reflex through your chest, that when you create a nice block to stop the rotation of that side, you can then use that stretch reflex in your chest to help snap the discus out on the finish. And there's a lot of moving parts in the discus throw, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys too early on, but I want to explain what you're trying to achieve with each body part so that you've got something in the back of your mind to think about. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the positioning of your feet and your body during a stand throw. And this plays an important role in allowing you to actually execute the movements properly. And I want to point out a few of the key things to keep in mind as you're trying this out for yourself. So the first thing I want to show you is where to actually stand. And I'm starting by marking out the sector lines. And if you don't have these on your own ring, I would say it's about 2 feet wide between the lines at the front of the ring. And then I'm just making a mark in the center of the ring and connecting the sector lines to that dot. And this is the line that you're going to want to have your feet on for a few important reasons. The first thing that I want to point out is that when your feet are on this line, you can turn your foot in the middle, allowing you to get your hips nice and square to the finish. And I'm trying to demonstrate that by showing you with the broomstick, where if your foot's too far over, we refer to this as being blocked off. And now as you try to turn your foot in the middle, you can't square your hips up to the finish, and you're ultimately going to be losing power in your stand throw. And when you're doing a full throw, you're trying to land in the same foot position. The next thing I wanted to point out is the angle that the block foot is facing. This is also a very important position because as you can see here, if the foot's pointing at this angle, again, you can turn your foot in the middle and get your hips nice and squared up to the finish. Where you see here, if I change the angle of my foot, now I can feel the pressure in my hip as I rotate my foot in the middle, and my hips don't square up as nicely to the finish. So as far as body position in the ring goes, as you set up over top of your leg in the middle, You should be thinking about trying to keep a nice vertical axis that the discus can rotate around. You don't want to be bending forward at the waist like this because it's going to create a lot of really inconsistent throws and you're wasting a lot of energy. Ideally, you're staying nice and tall, and that creates a really simple rotational axis that it's very easy to have the discus rotate around. The next thing I want to talk about is the movement of your feet during a stand throw. So as you set up and you're trying to think about keeping a nice vertical axis, what you're trying to do is rotate the foot in the middle and extend it, but you're doing those two movements at the same time, and that's causing a center of mass shift from over top of your leg in the middle to over top of your block leg. And keep in mind, you're trying to keep a nice solid block leg so that you can use your foot in the middle to rotate and drive you into that block. So again, you're rotating and then extending, but you're doing those two movements at the same time. And by using a broomstick for this drill, you can eliminate your arms and just focus on your leg movements, and you're trying to rotate up nice and square to the finish. Something important to keep in mind is that as you wind back, if your block leg starts to come off of the ground, look at Martin's heel, and he doesn't let it get very high from the ground, and that allows him to get it back down right away to establish a block so that he can rotate the rest of his body into that block. The next thing I wanted to quickly talk about is the movement of your arms in a stand throw. And the broomstick drill is great to show you what you want to do with your arms in the stand throw, because for the most part you want them to be opposite each other as a counterbalance so that you can maintain a nice vertical axis of rotation. With your throwing arm, it's important to keep in mind that you want to keep it as long as possible to maximize the radius, because a longer radius means that the implement's going to be moving faster at the tips of your fingers, so you don't want to be pulling in with your arm on the finish. It just stays nice and long throughout the whole throw. And the only time that you really need to deviate away from your arms being directly opposite each other is on the finish, and you're just trying to get a little bit of extra stretch from your off arm through your chest. But take note that I mean a little bit of extra stretch. You don't want to overdo it with your off arm because this can start to cause a lot of problems, which brings us into the next category, which is common mistakes. So I want you guys to kind of be able to use this portion of the video as a troubleshooting guide for your own technique. So if you go out and practice stand throws and are able to record yourself, check back with this section of the video. And if your throws look like anything that's going on in here, then you'll have a better idea of what you can start to fix. Because oftentimes, especially when learning, you're not going to be able to feel yourself missing the positions or pulling off balance. And it can be really frustrating when the disc is wobbling out and not flying nice. Anyway, let's get into some of the mistakes. The first common mistake is pulling your off arm too hard. When you do this, you can pull yourself off of your rotational axis, which will mess up the orbit of the discus, which in turn will mess up the flight of the discus. The second common mistake is leaving the discus too far behind. On the finish, you want everything to rotate around to the finish at the same time, but if the discus is too far behind, then you're going to need to continue to pull off of your rotational axis so you can get the discus down the middle, or since your hips are already finished, it's going to shoot out of your hand early and hit the cage or go out of the sector. The third common mistake is your head pulling early. As you rotate around, everything should be coming together at the same time. And if you start to peek over your shoulder and pull your head too hard, then that can also pull you off of your rotational axis. The next common mistake is having a bad block, and we also refer to this as shifting. When you're doing this, you can see the drastic change in the orbit as your legs extend on the finish. So you want to make sure that you're keeping a nice block so that you can rotate everything into it so that the discus stays on a nice smooth orbit around you. The next problem I mentioned earlier, but that's shortening your radius. And oftentimes this happens once you start to try to throw really hard. So you want to make sure that your throwing arm is nice and relaxed and long. And the final problem for this portion of the video I also briefly touched on, and that's bending forward. It's way faster and way more efficient to keep a nice vertical axis. And if you bend forward, it's going to be throwing your center of mass all over the place and make it really awkward and unbalanced. The final thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into some practice throws is some flight tips to help you get a nice smooth arc on the throw. The first most important thing is that you're holding it properly so that the discus can rotate off of your finger nicely. And if you haven't already seen it, you can go back and check out the first video, and I cover how to hold the discus and release it from your hand. But in this video, I want to focus on this image and point out a couple things. The first thing is the attitude of the discus, and this is a 28 to 29 degree tilt on the discus. That if you look at the top of this image, you can see that the tilt helps create a lower air pressure on top of the discus to help it stay in the air longer. And the second thing I want you to pay attention to is the roll of the discus. But what I really wanted to get across is that the outer edge of the discus is tilted down slightly, and the front edge of the discus is tilted up slightly. And that's going to help you get the most smooth arc. And this isn't way too important as you're learning, so don't stress over it or anything. but I wanted to make the most thorough guide possible, so I figure I'd give you guys some objectives to aim for with your release angle of the actual discus. So for the final portion of the video, I wanted to move into some of my own practice stand throws so that you guys can see what I'm thinking during practice. But first I wanted to say that if you guys have enjoyed the video so far or have learned something, smash that like button so we can get it out to as many throwers as possible. While these throws are going on, you can often hear Martin confirming whether it's a good throw or I've missed some positions. So on the throws that he says good, I'll try to play them back in slow motion. And on the throws that he says are all right, pay attention to the flight of the discus or my balance on the end of the throw, and see if you guys can start to notice some of the things that make them not a good throw. But here's practice and some cues that I'm thinking about. Big thing I've been feeling is that as I wind back, I don't want to let my shoulder drop out of my shoulder. I want to keep it nice and in line. So as I'm winding back, I'm just trying to keep the discus with me. And if you guys are out and throwing on your own, keep in mind that not every throw is going to be perfect, and it takes years to start to really dial in your technique. But the fastest way that you can get there is having a good understanding of all of the positions you're trying to achieve, so that when you watch back your own video or look at other throwers, you can start to pick out and find things that may work for your own technique. What I'm trying to do is keep the discus tall. Got a habit of kind of letting it get low and scooping it up. So keep it tall, keep it around.
If you can raise money. Nice, Jordan. Very good. 4 years from now, there's no versatility. What's different, right? Nice, nice.
Discus nice and tall, and keep it with my shoulder. Don't let it drop and get behind. So just stop it at a spot that it's there before it gets up to that point, and then I can finish it around. Keep it nice and rotational.
Not bad.
Yeah, I felt scoopy, I think.
Good. Okay. Fix it. Yeah. Up.
So that's going to be it for this video. I will see you guys in the next one, where I plan to cover the middle of the circle and start to introduce you to the back of the circle. So thank you very much for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if you really enjoyed it, subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.